What's happened? I was driving my car and it was high holidays. It was high holidays for Rosh Hashanah. And this is the beginning of the new year for Jewish people. And it's the time when we get clear. We have to do this 10 days of really self-examination. Where are we out of alignment with life? Where are we out of alignment with people that we love? Where are we out of alignment with Earth? Right. So it's a big time. And it's the time that it's a lot of time that many Jewish people, it's the only time that many Jewish people go to temple, right? So I'm one of those people, and I was on my way to temple and I was rushing, and I could feel that the rush was really the wrong way to go. And I thought, you know what? Perhaps my prayer can actually begin and how I prepare for the prayer. What if I like really slow all the way down? What if I take really good care? What if when I show up, I can fully receive the gift of what's there? So I did that. I started going really slow. And as I started making my way driving there, I ended up in a conversation with guidance itself. Anyone know what I'm talking about? Have any of you guys had that experience where all of a sudden the guidance is coming right through, and it's not your ego talking to you, it's like you're receiving something. And so I'm in this state of receiving, and I'm just like, wow, I'm feeling this connection. And it's the temple's in Oakland, California. If you guys know what it's like to park in Oakland, California, it's almost impossible. You often have to park like 5 or 6 or 10 or 12 blocks away. So I'm getting ready to park like 5 or 6 blocks away because surely I'm late for temple. There's not going to be a parking space anywhere near it. And I hear, go straight up to the front door. There's going to be a parking spot for you. And I was like, oh, come on. And I was like, all right. And I don't know if you guys like to do a little test with your higher power, but sometimes I get a little testy and I'm like, fine, I'm going to test if this is real true guidance. And so I'm going to drive right up to the front, which I don't think is actually there's going to be a parking spot. And sure enough, there was a parking spot. And so I'm driving in this real place of presence all the way up to the parking spot. And at that moment, um, I am getting ready to go into it. And I look into my rearview mirror to see that there's someone behind me driving, and they've got their phone in front of their face, and they've not seen that I put on my blinker or my brakes, and they smack right into me. And lucky for us, it wasn't that hard, but it was hard enough. It was hard enough where I got out of the car and I went over to this woman, and she wouldn't undo her windshield. She wouldn't undo her window. And I was like, look, you're going to have to deal with this. Like, you just hit the back of my car. And she undoes her window and she looks at me and she goes, what do you want? And it was one of those moments as if like the universe had just come into my world, had bopped me out of my normal whatever, and was really asking, because it was such a strange response, right? That's not how you respond to someone you just hit in the car, right? Normally you say, I'm sorry or whatever, but no, she was like, what do you want? And so it really put me in this great question of, what do I want? What do I really want? And so I'm not going to hit you with a car right now. That's not what I'm going to do, but I'm going to bring you that story of what it is to be shaken out of your reality for a moment, to get shaken a little bit off your path, get a little bit of the static out of the stories that we used to be telling. And I'm going to invite you to close your eyes. And I'm going to invite you to really come into the center of yourself, wherever the center of yourself is. And maybe place your hand on that space. And I'm going to invite you to see your soul fire alive and bright and burning in the best of ways. And maybe yours, and look at what is the color of your soul fire? What's burning inside of you? And I mean that in terms of like that spark of life, that life force, like what, that really feeling that aliveness in you. And I'm going to invite you to really feel yourself connected fully to this moment. So perhaps you're aware of the air that's touching your skin, becoming aware of all the sounds in your room. Perhaps there are sounds outside of your room that are coming in. Perhaps there are parts of your own body that you hear. And from this place, I'm going to start inviting you to take a nice deep breath to the bottom of your belly. But even as you do that, I'm going to invite you just to notice, how are you positioned right now? Don't change anything. Just noticing. Are you leaning forward? Are you slouching back? Are you really erect? How does this feel in terms of how you're meeting this moment of your life? And we're not asking right or wrong answers. We're just noticing. Maybe some part of you wants to take a shift. Perhaps you want to imagine that there's a string at the top of your head and allow it to pull up your spine, creating a little bit more room for your organs. And maybe from there, you want to take a nice deep breath. Roll your shoulders back, open your palms. And from this place, just asking that question, what do you want? What did you come here for? Some of you might have big stories inside of you banging around, making it very uncomfortable until they get out. Some of you may have a muse tapping on your shoulder, inspiring you with the new stories of our time, pleading with you to get to work and play more and tell your stories. Some of you may feel compelled to be the carriers of the old stories. Some of you may know it's your turn to use your voice and there's a block or a barrier in the way and you're ready to let it be removed. As you come to your clarity of what did you come to this hour for? What did you come to receive? This is your universe saying, how can I serve you today? And you're going to the cosmic waitress of storytelling and you're saying, this is my order for today's prescription. This is the meal I would love to eat. This is that moment. So I invite you, as you're ready, to open your eyes and just place in the chat box. Place in the chat box if there's something that you see there that you want to bring clarity to. Terry's saying, I'm going to find my voice. Beautiful. Sherry is saying, I've come to find out if you are my teacher. Peter is saying, integration of trust. Anne is saying, to be a voice of truth. Great. Parker's got a big story that he's working on with lots of enthusiasm. Anne is saying, I want to write a new story of my life, one where I shine, remove the blocks in my voice. Yeah. Louise is saying, being fully myself. Sandra is saying, I want to be determination to devote myself to writing again, to channel the story I have to tell. Okay. So in terms of themes, I'm hearing removing blocks. I'm hearing tell my story. There's a piece around telling truth. We heard earlier to get to the essence of my stories. I want to weave a basket to hold heartbeat voices. Oh, it's beautiful. Tasha's saying there's a conversation I need to have. Then I will be freer to do my work. Okay. And Colleen's saying remove distractions and how I share my stories. And Janice saying safely so I get back to the adventure in my story. Okay. Okay. So I'm receiving all of this and a little bit more. And we're going to go on an adventure. I'm hearing that there's a little bit of request for structure and discipline in terms of how to get your work out into the world. So I'm going to try to fold that into. For all of you guys, just so you know, I have you on gallery view. If you want just to look at me, you can. You can go up to the top and you can hit spotlight, and then you'll just be looking at me. I love being in gallery view because storytelling is a collective experience. Stories actually come from those who are catching them. It is the biggest magic trick in the universe. You are actually the storytellers, and I get to be the deepest listener of all time with a big loud mouth, speaking the stories that I'm hearing among us. It's one of the roles that really sacred storytellers do. So we're going to take a little adventure into what is a story, what is sacred storytelling. We're going to put an emphasis on how do we change a story. So we'll go into that. And so if you can place yourself on video, I am in active response. Look, I'm seeing Anne smile right now, and I will be responding to all of you. And so there we go. Okay, so um, okay, Madeline, I'm just reading your note about feeling the pressure of this big story. And yeah, I'd want to understand more about that difficulty with breathing, so we can hang on for a little bit at the end. Okay, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to do this really fancy little presentation with you. It helps keep me a little bit present with you because I tend to love just to go be so full in the moment. But what I want you to do is keep your questions there. I'm keeping all of your questions alive in me, and we're going to go and really kind of go into this dance of what does it mean to change a story. I wanted to ask one thing before I do this. How many are you are here for the first time? Okay. Okay. So we're going to do a very, very quick review in terms of what is a story and what is a sacred story. So normally we do a big part in this, so I'm just going to cut to the chase just so that we get on the same page. So what is a story? Um, it's many things to many different people. In the context for how we're going to be meeting it today, we're looking at how many of our many people use the metaphor of technology to speak in reference to themselves as humans. So I'm going to use that, because that's what we're oftentimes using. And so I'm going to say a story is an operating system where we learn our beliefs, our values, what roles to play. It often teaches us the right and wrong way, like how to live on earth. That's often like a story. So when we look at some of the original stories, and what do they call the origin stories that come from earth-based cultures around the globe, indigenous cultures, what were those stories? But they were literally the operating manual. They taught you how to live on earth. There were teachings in them, there were warnings, and there was guidance. Now, when we think about our modern day stories and the language that we use around it, one of my favorite teachers, Stephen Jenkinson, says, I don't trust storytellers, but I trust words. They'll never let you down. And so what is our television called? Programming, right? It's TV program. In fact, those of us who got to grow up with a TV guide, it was called programming. So it's all in our language. Now, that's like a very modern day pedantic expression of what a story is. And that's not what we're here for. Okay, you guys came because you smelled the resonance of something called a sacred story. And so when I use the word sacred, what does that word conjure? But it conjures, I honor the life in you. I see the life in you. And so when I think of a sacred story, I'm thinking, oh, this is something that has a life form inside of it. And inside of it, that means that it is serving life. And so when we're talking about who are we as sacred storytellers, we are talking story, like someone said, Riva said, I want to be here for belonging and connection, right? Because she knows that inevitably we're going to end up in some kind of experience of a sacred story. And what do you often feel at the end of a sacred story? You feel connected. either to something new in your own consciousness. Either maybe you got access to some grief or sadness. Maybe you got access to some rage, some sacred rage. Sacred stories don't have to be pretty little ditties that make you feel all perfect and good. They can shake you up. They can upset you. They can show you the shadow. They can warn you about the dangers of humanity. But there's going to be a couple of key things that are always going to be in a sacred story. There's going to be beauty in a sacred story, because beauty feeds the soul. And so a sacred story, you'll always leave it feeling connected. You'll get a little boost. You'll feel a little bit better. You'll want to exercise, quit sugar, caffeine, and all the things tomorrow. You want to be the best version of yourself. I don't know, maybe your best version has caffeine and sugar. Why not say that? Um, um, yes, a story is, oh, I said it's an operating system, Howard. But that's a really ugly way of describing it. And one of the ways that I understand about storytelling is that it has this very mysterious, unexplainable thing. And this class isn't designed to get into the details of this, but our connection to Earth comes through and is very easily visible through our connection to story. Our connection to story is our connection. So let me try to be a little bit literal with you for a few moments about this thing that is absolutely nonlinear. Many people agree that the body is a vehicle for the soul. Are we kind of on a similar path? You don't have to agree. This is a story that I'm telling, right? And I'm going to say that a story is the vehicle for spirit, and that spirit can live through us through stories, even go through the spirit of life. Okay. And so I can share a story that has lots of joy in it. And all of a sudden, the spirit of joy comes through me. This is why old actors were considered a shamanic act. The very first actor was literally presencing the god of Dionysus into human form. Okay, so we can invite the spirit of joy. And I tell you, this really joyful is why we love comedians, right? Because they bring joy into the room, and we get to share joy, just like we can share grief. We can open hearts, or just like we can spread fear or disconnection. So stories are incredibly powerful. And there are many different kinds. In other classes, we talk about the zombies and the vampires and the clone stories, but we're not going to do that today. But that's just a little bit of background in terms of bringing us kind of all onto the same page of what are we talking about when we're talking about a sacred story. So even as Louise comes to tell her memoir, is that right? Wait, who was that? Nope, sorry. That was Steve. That was writing her memoir. That when we come and we think of it as a sacred story, when I come to you as a sacred story, by the time I come as a sacred storyteller and cross the threshold to give you that story, it's no longer my story. It's our story. And as Stephen, oh my gosh, he wrote Grapes of Wrath. Somebody help me. Who wrote? John Steinbeck. Sorry, I got the S. John Steinbeck says, your story will not last if it's not about the listener. He said reader. I'm saying listener. It will not last if it's not about the reader. And so meaning that by the time we come to tell our story, to give it away, it's no longer just our stories. It's a gift that can be given, because now it's about all of us. And this is the laboring of what it is to become a storyteller. Right? We can be carriers, we can do all different kinds of things with our stories, but when you're really saying, no, I am going to come to the threshold, I'm going to do the big laboring of writing it down, bringing it to earth, I'm going to try to edit it, I'm going to make it worthy of your time and energy. It's no longer just about me, it's about us. And when you think about some of the most evocative stories that touch, that have a string of resonance in so many people, it's because they're touching something that's living in others, right? And there's some eternal universal truth. So that's a bigger thing. Okay, so now we're all on the same page of what it is to be that part of things. So I'm going to come back to this world. So today we're talking about, if we know that it's a sacred story, but we're like, oh gosh, there's a story and we want to do something with it. We want to change it. So we've already talked about this part. I love this quote. Old stories and new stories are essential. They tell us who we are, and they enable us to survive. We thank all the ancestors and we thank all those people who keep on telling stories generation after generation, because if you don't have stories, you don't have anything. Leslie Mormon Silko. So we already did our little review of what is a story. Today we're going to be going over the ethics of changing a story. We're going to talk about 3 things to take into consideration when doing this, and then I'll give you a couple of examples of how we can change stories. So a little bit about who am I? I got to see that there's a couple of people who this is your first time, so I'll share a little bit about this. I began to learn the language of story when I grew up in a farm in Vermont, and we had 40 acres of land, and my parents let me run wild, and I got to go be in nature. And I really believe now looking back that that was the beginning of my relationship to storytelling, because I was in a place where my imagination was absolutely allowed to run wild, and where I think that sense of deep listening really truly emerged in the most natural way. I began to learn the responsibility of storytelling, basically like that what goes out comes in, through a very tragic circumstance. And I want to rewind just a little bit before I get to that, which is that when I was growing up, I moved a lot. Has anyone else moved from like town to town when you were a kid, always a new kid in school? Okay, a couple of you. So it's like, that pretty much, I don't know what your experience was. Mine really sucked. And so I dove into stories. They were like my absolute rescue. And they were my sanctuary, and they were my safe place, and they were really my escape. And so when I went through this extreme tragedy when I was 16, when my best friend committed suicide, I didn't know what to do with myself. And so I went to that place that had been my sanctuary. But in this situation, I wasn't consuming anyone else's story. I was learning how to write my own. And absolutely accidentally, I was discovering the healing power of creating a story, that it's the place that we can go to make meaning. And in that way, I wrote a play. It got into a playwriting festival. I got to see it on the stage. And that's when I learned the responsibility. Because what you put out into the world, it's a boomerang, comes right back. We get that in social media, right? You put out good vibes, you get good vibes back. Well, sometimes you put bad vibes out, you're going to get bad vibes back. So it's like the same thing. So I learned that I share my grief, other people are going to bring me their grief. I learned the business of storytelling when I was working off Broadway, and I was studying at Williamstown Theater Festival and with Sandy Meisner at the Neighborhood Playhouse. And I learned that that was not the place I wanted to operate. And so I ended up really walking with this big question. My big question was like, how do I bring healing to the world? It's like, what's my role in this crazy time that I'm being raised in? And I knew that arts were some of it, but I also had this penchant for social justice and environmental protection. So I got a degree in environmental education through performance, and I got a master's degree in social work. And I was really trying to figure out how to bring all those things together. When I ended up working with Al Gore and his television network, and I produced and hosted the Green Channel there. And I thought in many ways this was like my pinnacle, job. Like this was like the ultimate thing that I wanted to do. Because here I was able to amplify the most powerful story in our world and really speak about the urgency that we were in. And what I discovered was that this was back in 2007. It was the first television network that had a website connected to it, and we could see a lot of data. And I thought all we needed to do is give people the information, inspiration, motivation, activation. That's how it was operating. And what the data showed me was that people were not responding to data. They were responding to stories. And so that gave me my ticket. That gave me my ticket out of jail in terms of working in the media company. If I was really walking, they say that if you've got to, you either go for impact or power or influence. It's like I wanted influence. I wanted to influence people. So when I looked at that, there was one other key moment that I really discovered, which is that whenever I had a really big challenge in my life, and if it was like, oh, there's no love in my life, blah, 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 I would go to the realm of story and I would start working it out there. So even while I was getting a master's in social work and discovering, all these really critical tools for how to work with healing, I was finding in my own experience that storytelling had a way to touch us not only in our mind, our consciousness, and through our bodies, and in relationship. And I was beginning to discover that stories have this really extraordinary way of teaching us how to be human through the expression of telling them. It was really something. So eventually, I ended up leaving the corporate media world and I ended up really working on a very big story. And that was a bigger journey and a big different story. But I ended up starting just to teach these classes about what I was learning. The first class had 6 people in it. The next class had 12 people in it. The first program I had 70 people in it. And I started to see, oh, there's something here. This bridge of working with story to understand ourselves, how to understand ourselves, our true nature, and this aspect of it being the key to our connection to ourselves, to our community, and to the earth itself. So that's a little bit about what brought me here to you today. So one of the things that I really appreciate about story is that it's consciousness made visible through thought and form, through words. In Japanese, there's a word called kotodama. It means word spirit. And it talks about the spirit of a word before it even enters our consciousness. And one of the things, what do we know about stories is that they have their own language. So you go to France, you learn French. You go to Spain, you learn Spanish. You go to the realm of story, what is the realm of story? It's on this plane, but story is multidimensional, right? It gives us access to the unseen world. It's so magical, it's hard to put into words that we can all see the same things in our minds just by the employment of language. And so when we start thinking about what is the role of the sacred storyteller, it's that we're giving people access to the unseen. And we're allowing those things to become seen and known. But how does storyteller operate? Stories, they speak through symbols. They speak through metaphor. What is metaphor but the language of spirit? They speak through archetype, or these universal structures. So I would say that one of the great challenges of humanity right now is that many have lost their relationship to story. And that's a whole other topic I'm not going to go fully into right now. So that's opening like Pandora's box. So I'm just going to put that one back, and we're going to this is why I have to make these little these things to keep us online. But right, they're giving us access by putting words and names to it. So what does a story do? What does it do? And if you guys want to put something in the chat box, happy to do that. What do stories do? And I missed a question there. What is the role of the sacred storyteller? And what is your role? And that's actually a real question I want to invite you all into for a few moments and see your chats. If you could do that. What is your role as sacred storyteller in these times? Just coming back here to see what you have to say about that. We're asking, what do stories do, and what is your role as a sacred storyteller? And I would say that I think that one of the great challenges of our time is that when we don't understand how powerful we are as storytellers and what our role in place is in the creation of the world, then things can get a little haywire. And I would say that that might be a little bit of what we're experiencing. Here's a fun metaphoric expression that I heard recently that will put us into the kind of same plane of consideration, which is I once heard that in indigenous traditions, some of them they use tobacco. Tobacco is used to carry the prayers. Right? And it's very well known and understood there. And that now in our modern time, tobacco is being used all the time. People are swearing, saying all different kinds of things when they're engaging tobacco, but the tobacco, it's still doing its job. It's carrying, it's carrying the prayers. And so when you say, when someone said that's why one of the reasons things are getting all wally wonky, is because we're out of relation and our words are being used in all different kinds of ways. So I would say the same thing almost about storytelling, that there's a real role that storytellers have in these times. And I'm looking for my glasses, but here we go. Okay, so here's what we've got here. So, oh, Karen's saying to wake people up. I love that, right? To wake people up. Terry's saying to touch hearts. Peter's saying it reflects movement and beauty and still teaching. And saying it's showing up, showing that the unseen is always here with us, is our foundation. Ooh, I'm already feeling good. I like being around these storytellers. Madeline's saying, imagine as a wisdom keeper, inspire as a wisdom keeper, right? To inspire people to presence wisdom. Jenny's saying storytellers are myth makers, right? Says Joseph Campbell. And what is a myth? But the story speaking, the earth speaking out loud, according to Sean Kane. Madeline, and did you know that a true myth, if the definition of a myth is that it has no owner? I love myths. A true myth, you'll never know who wrote it, and they get to wander free and wild. They're never just captured by a word. I always feel a little bit bad when a story has to be written down, because I think about it sort of like being enslaved. It's just stuck in that same way over and over again. When really, like, as we're storied beings, our lives were meant to grow, right? Trees, we want them to grow. Children, we want them to grow. Stories, we want them to grow. Hence, how do we change a story? How do we grow our stories up? So even some of the oldest stories, I question them. I'm like, well, do they want to grow? Dana's saying to reflect lived life back to life, stewarding connection. Steve is saying, you want to take the hand of the listener and reader to walk a different path through various environments. Right. So Steve is talking about this really specific role. What is it to be a guide? And when we think about that and the role and responsibility of storyteller as a guide through the consciousness. And I often think about, we want our guides to be trustworthy, and that if you're going to take us out to the farthest edges, you better bring us home. Right. And think about also the storytellers. And and I always think about, if I get in the realm of a storyteller and I don't think that they're a trustworthy storyteller and they're just going to take me into the middle of a hell zone and leave me there, I'm out. I'm like, I'm not going on your journey. No way. I don't see an emergency aid kit in your backpack. So it's like, and I think that we're actually often doing this a lot of times, assessing our storytellers. Can you bring me all the way there and back? Because that will determine how deep into my consciousness will I let you. So one of the things we talk about when we determine sacred storytellers is oftentimes put on our little sacred storytelling goggles, and it's like going underwater in the consciousness, and we can watch all the stories go by and determine, well, who do I want to live in my real estate of my consciousness? Who do I want there? And that's different than saying, I don't want to hear that. That scares me. That's whatever. This is different. I feel like when you're in the realm of sacred storytelling goggles, you got your oxygen tank on, and you can really, notice everything, and you can have self-determination. Tasha's saying to open space for empathy, compassion, the reader and listener, right? Reva's talking about the release the squeezed. I didn't quite get that one, but it sounds nice. So, right. So it's like we're really talking about, there's storytellers have a real role and function. And I would say one of the roles and functions that of a sacred storyteller, that is almost been forgotten, as that part of what we do is we plant the seeds for the future. We give people something to live into. And so when I was speaking to one of our guest teachers who's coming up, Nick, who's worked on the front lines of a lot of different war zones, I was asking him, I was like, Nick, like, when do you know it's time to, like, you can work with people that are in trauma? Like, when do you know it's time to, like, have them be able to tell their story? And what kind of stories do you tell? Nick didn't miss a beat. He said, you tell them stories of hope. That's the only story you tell. And it really, really landed in me in terms of, how do we be of service to people? when they're getting robbed, when they're in crisis? How do we keep telling them that there's a place for them in this great big story that's unfolding in our world? And so I would say that, while we want our warning stories about what could happen in the world, we've gone a little off wire because there's too many saying that that is what's going to happen, and that's not storytelling. That's spell casting, and that's something else altogether. So again, putting on our sacred goggles. What kind of story am I? Teller am I? What am I in service to? These are some of the great big questions that we ask. Um, okay. So 5 things to take into consideration. What's the source of your story? Right? This is how many of us are having to ask this over and over and over again. But even the old stories, Medea was written by Euripides, who was paid to write that story. That's a whole other story. He was literally paid to rewrite and actually lie about what actually happened, that she didn't kill her kids. The townspeople of the king who she killed, they were ticked. They killed her kids. Paid Euripides. This is known facts. Paid Euripides, the playwright, to write the story that she did it. Well, a lot of bad things happen. I guess instant karma is a pain because Euripides then got banished for writing it, not because he told a lie, but because it was the first story that we've ever had that shows a woman as being so powerful. But look at that story. It planted the seeds of distrust in the feminine because that she could destroy what she creates. And that's a whole other thing, that did all kinds of things. But so we always want to go to who is the source of this story? Why are they telling it? Who's paying them? It's a really simple, not so simple question today, but if you really want to understand a story, you have to understand the times that it was in. You also want to talk about the bones of the story. One of the ways that you can look at the bones of the story is like if I go to Cinderella and I'm like, I want to see if Cinderella wants a makeup job, she wants to be a little upgraded, for looking at the technological terms. The first thing you need to do is look at the bones. And the way that you can understand the bones, especially the old myths, is that many of the myths emerged on every continent around the world, told in slightly different ways. Isn't that cool? I mean, that's so cool, And so, if you really want to understand one of these stories, you gotta be responsible, and you gotta get to know its whole family, its cousins and all of that. And then you start to really know what it's made of. And you know this, right? When you have a good friend and you get to meet their parents, their siblings, and all that, you're like, oh, now I understand you, right? Same thing with a story. You have to know its siblings. You have to know all the other ones that were like it so that you can hear what is the universal thread that runs through every story. And now you've got a really strong skeleton that you're working with. You want to know who's the author and what are they in service to? What couldn't be said when the story was written? You got to be a little bit of an anthropologist and researcher. You got to understand the times that storyteller was living in, and you have to understand how much reading between the lines you need to go. They say that in old fairy tales, they hid secret teachings inside these old fairy tales that they wouldn't be lost. Isn't that cool? But you need to know how to learn. You need to know how to look for them in the stories. What does the story have to say for itself? Meaning, what wisdom is it offering? You can't go to Sleeping Beauty and be like, I don't like this thing about, Prince having to wake her up, off with that, that's the ego. You got to go to the story and say, and this is when we're talking about a sacred story that has a life of its own. This is when we get to really, I actually think that storytelling is one of the best gigs in town because it's when your ego gets to go on vacation. You get to send it to, I don't know, the Pyrenees or Bermuda or whatever your idea of vacation is. And you get to go into that deep place of listening. And you allow, as a storyteller, for the story to guide you into it. It is a gateway into the mysteries, if there ever is. And actually, that sounds woo-woo as I say it, but it's actually I just read this, and it's from this book that's in the other room called it's from a Jewish rabbi, and she was talking about how it was actually a secret teaching in the Kabbalah that the imagination is known to be a gateway, their language, God. I'll just say, let's put that into universal language. It's a gateway to creation energy, life energy. So when we come to, what are we considering? I want to know is like, what is the universal wisdom that's living in this story? What does this story have to inform me about? I always feel like we get to be the first ones that get to discover things. So when we want to talk about how to change a story, we're going to look at the difference between what is a narrative and what is a story. And guys, I'm going to go just a couple of minutes over because I want to finish this for you today. And we got a little bit of a late start. So a narrative is a directive. Just do it. Nike. Okay, that's a narrative. A story is not going to tell you what to do. It will give you a place to be, and I think that's a easy, simple way to describe the difference. Key messages. So in our current narrative, we've got a race to save the planet. We know that climate change. We've got the issue with Race to Save the Planet is that teaching actually goes against all ancient wisdom. Right? We all know that haste makes waste. That the turtle wins the race. Right? All of our old teachings really teach about the power of slow. So what if we stopped racing and overusing all of our resources and slowed down to create balance and restoration? Another way, just shifting that story just a little bit, that narrative a little bit. Another key message is change is bad, climate change. It's like the casting director cast change as the bad guy when change is the very essence energy of Earth. That's what she does. She's been changing her whole life. And now we're saying, but since we've decided to stay in one place now, look, I don't want to, I'm playing with you as a storyteller. Okay. I'm not negating what's happening on our planet. But what I want to do is talk about what happens when we get out of alignment with the true essence of Earth in terms of how we tell the story. And that if anything, we are going to be asked to make all kinds of changes to get back into balance. We want to make change the good guy. So how can we change the story so that it gives us a powerful place to be rather than a victim of it? I think a very other part that's very, very dangerous in this particular story is that people are bad. So one of the things that you're noticing bad for the planet. So you're noticing when we're looking at wanting to change a story, we're looking for what are the key messages that are coming in it. A lot of people don't like Sleeping Beauty because it says, oh, a woman has to be, rescued by a man. Right? That's one of the key messages that's in there. There's a lot more in there, but that's one of them. Right. So it's like when we look at this story that we want to change, we're looking for those key messages. So coming back to this idea that people are bad for the planet. No, people are amazing for the planet. If anyone gardens, you know how much plants need us. I just learned this yesterday, that we actually put out more carbon dioxide than we do take in oxygen. That means that like we're feeding life just through our mere breath, and that we can do so many beautiful, innovative things. I think a lot of people are stuck in systems that are run by greed that are doing destructive things to the planet. But that's different than people are bad for the planet. So, when you're looking at a story that you want to change, ah, that person in my family is horrible. Like there's some co-agreement that that person's horrible. What is the service and what is the narrative in service to? We all know the scapegoat aspect that can happen in family systems or community systems. So it's really coming back to when we look at it, the quickest way again is go for the easy sacred storytelling goggles. Is this story in service to life? Is it building connection? Is it bringing us closer together? Is it expanding our consciousness? Is it providing a space for new ways and new thoughts to come in? Because if it's shutting down that, if it's creating disconnection, if it's separating us, if it's putting in fear, it's kind of fascinating now because we understand how the brain works and that our brain actually gets off on all that stuff. We get just as much pleasure out of I'm now calling it trauma porn. Actually, I'm not the one. I didn't create that term, but I really like it. Than the good stuff. And the reason is because we're getting dopamine hits and we're getting serotonin and we're getting all this stuff that our brain thinks that it's good to take in those stories. That they've actually proven this about gossip, that our brain gets pleasure sensors when we do that. So it creates it creates an opportunity to be very disciplined and discerning storyteller when you start thinking about, how do I want to use my words? What stories do I want to tell? And understanding that your mind is extraordinary. It's an incredible landscape that you can navigate. Our brains are kind of like primordial beasts that are very easily tricked and fooled. And it's the dance between those two. And as storytellers, we are definitely the ones that have our hands on the reins of the consciousness of the mind. So, what is an accurate rewrite? That might be, so we kind of already played with that. So, again, it's like, where in your life are we going towards fear-based narratives versus love-based narratives? And how do they affect us? I talked a little bit about that. And then, I love this. How do you change a story when something or someone is driving you crazy? Is anyone dealing with this? It's a betrayal. Somebody broke our heart. Somebody upset us. The neighbor, the roommate, the ex, the blah 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 blah. I'm not seeing a lot of hands, but maybe I'm just the only one that's had to deal with any of this stuff. But it's like you're dealing with someone that is like causing some kind of disruption in your life, and it's a disruption because you go to wash the dishes and you're blah, 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 thinking about them. You go for a walk, blah 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 blah, right? It's disrupting the flow of inspiration and all that awesome stuff that your muse wants to tell you about, right? So when we're looking at anything that's disrupting your flow of thoughts, and so this is where the sumo wrestler flip comes in. This is one of my favorite tools of all time. You got to be willing to do something if you're really going to engage this technique. It's an advanced maneuver, and you've got to be willing to not be right. Okay, so if you're attached to the story, I'm right, they're wrong, and that's it, this will not work for you. Okay, this is playing in another room. I think of this as the escape hatch out of right and wrong, and out of into a bigger story. And so what we're going is we've got the human story that's playing out, and then we have our soul experience, the experience of the soul. So again, this is operating under a belief system. So this might be a belief system you share, it might not be. But if you think that, oh, my soul came to this planet and it's here to do something, this is going to work for you. And so you say, okay, I've got this person and they're disrupting my life. They're saying, I'm not going to take another step forward until I deal with this. So the first thing that we can do is we can reframe it. We can say, oh, awesome. You're not a victim to this experience. You've been offered initiation. Oh, great. Initiations, they ask us to be strong, and there's rules to initiations. We have to let something go to let something in. It's like, it's just the rules of initiation. So when you come to this moment where you're like, oh, life's initiating me, and I'm going to have to let go of the ego. I'm going to go in and I'm going to take this person who is being a jerk, blah, 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 and I'm going to do the sumo wrestler flip. Boom. I'm going to recast them in my role. And now they are my master teacher. Okay. They've been cast as your master teacher. And the story, the narrative that you're looking at them through, the lens that you're looking at them through is, what if their soul came to offer my soul something that no one else can? And through our experience, they are calling something out in me to perhaps be strengthened, to be examined, to be looked at. And so now we're in a totally different conversation. It's not blah, 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 you blah, 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 blah. It's like, oh, you're right. I do need to grow a backbone. Oh, you're right. I do need better boundaries. Oh, you're right. I do need to actually speak honestly about what I feel and think. Okay, whatever your narrative is. So that's one way to flip the story and start, and what you're literally doing, because when we run the same story over and over, that's warning number one. If you've got a story that's on a racetrack, you're not growing new neural pathways, right? So we want to get off the racetrack and we want to get you onto a new neural pathway where you can have another way of experiencing it, both biologically and in your consciousness. So what are you doing? You're telling a bigger story. You're telling the story of your soul. So I'm concerned that we are reaching our relationship to time. We've met our relationship to time. Here we are. I could keep going and going and going and going and going. This is one of my absolute favorite things to do, is to really open the doorway to exploring how to work with story as not only a tool to liberate our voice, to transform our consciousness, to bring us closer to our community, and to place us into the cycle of life. Because when we're really coming as sacred storytellers, we do the good work to figure out what our story is so that we can give it away. And so my favorite expression of what a story really is that it's a library of the soul. And so that is our class today. If you wanted to get a little siblings of what is it to be in relationship to story, sacred storytelling, and how to change a story, I am going to stay on a little bit longer and talk about a course that we have coming up that Louise is in, which is called Wisdom Stories, and a greater program that we're also offering, which is called The Alchemy of Story. So I'll hang out and do about 5 minutes of explaining what that is. Bye, Louise. I'll see you on November 26th. And then I'll hang out for questions and be available for that. I'm going to give you some links right now, just because the internet is what it is and email is what it is. And I think it's just an absolute miracle that you made it through somehow today. So let me give you the link to this, because that way you'll have it. And I'm also going to tell you that I'm going to give you 3 links. You're welcome, Tasha. So this is the link to the actual program Wisdom Stories. I'm going to give you one more link. This is the link to the program of The Alchemy of Story, which I'm about to tell you about. And then I'm going to give you one more link just so that you have all of them. That if you think that this is something that you want to do, I want to give you the keys to the castle and give you an opportunity to sign up for a discovery call, if that's something that you want to do. So I'm just going to give you all of this so that while I'm sharing the goods, you have those links right at your fingertips. Okay. Except that now I lost my way. It's all fair game until I lose my way. Hold on, where did you go, little thing? If anyone has any questions, this is a great moment to ask them. Okay. Here we go. I'm going to go into this little presentation for you. So when we talk about, especially like, sorry, I can't rub my belly and chew gum at the same time. I can only do one thing. Hold on. Let me open this. Thank you for your patience. There we go. Okay. So this is a school for sacred storytelling, and this is something that I've been super honored to be a part of creating. And when I really started looking at, what to do in these times and how do we restore balance and connection and how do we create a place to understand each other, storytelling became to be kind of like almost like a covert operating system. It looks like you're not doing much, but all you're doing is like changing the way that people see the world. It's very powerful. And you're also giving people the tools to navigate challenging times. And this is why I feel particularly passionate about what it is to hold this kind of place right now. Because, what do we know that stories do? That they bring more love into the world and connection. I've never told stories to a room full of people that I haven't fallen in love with. It creates connection. It gives you an experience of stepping onto the pathway as elder because you know that you have something to give. It creates a sense of belonging. We can give people an opportunity to know what it is to walk in someone else's shoes. We create bridges between worlds. We give people access to their universal wisdom. And when we're doing stories really right, we're also giving people access to their own sovereignty and to their own deep inner knowing. We're getting out of the 6 bullet points that change your life. No, it's like 4 ways to get love into your life. No, we're going to be like, okay, how do you know that all that you need is inside you? It's not out there, it's right here. And as storytellers, that's inherently what we're doing when we give people a story, because we're giving them a sanctuary to be in their consciousness. It's an extraordinary thing to get to hold with people. So we've had this is old now, 40 teachers. I would say we probably had over 70 guest teachers come in. We've had over probably, I don't know, over 3,000 learners that have come in. This is from a couple of years ago, in the past 7 years. And what do we do? But we do live programs and study on your own classes. We have a monthly membership. It was called the Lunatic membership. We changed it because I get to be creative. Now it's just our Sacred Storytelling monthly membership. But we meet twice a month on the new moon for a story ceremony. And we meet on the full moon for a co-creative process. And then we also have story jams where you can just come and write and create in community. It's super fun. And we also offer private coaching and mentorship. And we have an amazing roster of teachers that you can work with. Oops, blah, 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 there we go. Some of the things that students have said that they've come through that really inspire me, and I get inspired a lot by the people that come through here, is that people come through the classes, their imagination gets sparked. They find new ways of using their voices. They find, the community standards around always looking for and calling for each other's greatness. It makes it a very fun, supportive environment to be in. A lot of people have liberated old stories. We do not only storytelling, but I also engage earth-based practices. So there's a lot of different ways to work into the transformational game. And one of my favorite things is when people go find their own true unique voice, their own gift and their way of expressing it in the world. And Alora over there, she was an animator. She now has her own business working with youth and animation and to help them understand their emotions. It is so her, and she deals with bipolar and depression, and she's given them this creative outlet. And it's such a cool thing. So the program that we have right now is the Alchemy of Story. And this is Tools for Change. And actually, sorry, it's November 26th. And we have, what it is it's made up of these 6-week creative intensives. And we meet on Tuesdays from 11 to 1 a.m. with me. And then we also have guest teachers that come in. I'm gonna come out of this one, and I'm gonna show you one other thing that will be a little bit more up to date. That'll just show you where we are. And so this is the video, which we're not going to watch because you've got me right here. These 6 different programs, these are our guest teachers. And our guest teachers are, everyone knocks it out of the park. They each one open entire new doorways. And the reason why I love getting to bring in these guest teachers is because they each weave another thread into the great tapestry of opening your doorway for how story wants to live through you. And in each story, in each course, what you have is you'll have oftentimes someone that brings some kind of Indigenous teaching. You'll have someone that gives you hardcore storytelling and writing skills, and someone who kind of walks the line in terms of how to work with story as a tool for healing. And so that's why it's really called the Alchemy of Story, is really understanding the breadth of what story can do. Our next course begins November 26th. And we're going to be diving into wisdom stories. And this is where we take a moment in our life that was a little bit disrupted, and we really get to harvest it for all the wisdom. So we will be doing a little bit of the sumo wrestler flip, but so much more to get to a really powerful story. And at the end of the 6 weeks, we'll have a little mini storytelling festival, and you'll get an opportunity to practice telling your story in in front of our whole group. Along the way, you'll get to meet with small groups both in class and outside of class if you want to. And this is when the classes are highly interactive. You'll be with people the whole time. You get to create a lot. You get some assignments outside of class, but here's what I've learned over years of doing this is that oftentimes in our modern world, people are so busy that being able to have this time to create is what makes it really helpful and supportive for them. So some little things to do outside of class, but a lot of the creation time happens inside of class. We'll take holiday break over this one, over the holidays, so we won't have class. We'll only be back, so we do a little bit of November, a little bit of December, a little bit of January, and you get some real time for your wisdom story to emerge. And we go into medicine stories in the new year. And this is really looking at one of the oldest ways of how to be with stories, which is that, and they say that the Celtic bards could raise boils on the skin, that it was known that a storyteller could heal just with a story. And so we're going to get to know that kind of old way of being with story. We're going to learn some of the modern ways about narrative medicine with Louise. Jacqueline's going to be talking about the hidden teachings that you can find in fairy tales. And then Josh, he's the founder of the Emerald podcast that some of you guys might be familiar with. And we'll be going deep into, understanding the mysteries of the, oh my gosh, mythic realms. And because that's what we'll also be doing. We'll be diving in and conjuring a story for healing also. So you'll learn two different ways of being with story as medicine. We'll take a couple of weeks off because we take a couple of weeks off in between each different module, and then we'll go into change. And change is really about how do we tell stories that protect the things that we love. And so you'll have an opportunity to learn how to tell a teaching story, how to tell a vision story, and lead a vision council. And then you'll also have an opportunity to really create something where you speak for something that you deeply care about. And our teachers for there are just incredible. It's going to be Liz Lehrman, who won a MacArthur Award. It's going to be Nick, who I told you about earlier, who's worked on the front lines in many different ways, working with theater and the arts. And then it's also Gigi, and we also have Celia. And Celia actually speaks with people who professionally use their work in the news. And we're going to go into ceremony. And ceremony is one of the most mysterious of courses, and it's really designed to help you understand the esoteric energetics of storytelling and who you are as a storyteller. I'm not going to go too deep into that, but our guest teachers, Bayo, is just extraordinary. Heather, I mean, both. It's like it really dives into the mysteries. And we'll end with essence. And essence is that class where you get to really understand how do you get to the core of your true essence? How do you understand how to tell that by knowing your origin stories, your family stories, your lineage stories, and the stories of your land? And through that kind of experience, you come out with your essence story. And that's how you end. So that's the program. What I would say is that we also have available for certification. So if you're feeling like, oh, I want this and I want to take it to the next level, there's an opportunity to get certified. And that's for people who say, I want to actually lead people through this process as well. So I never talk this much in class. It's much more of you guys doing the talking. And so if you have any questions, I will stay on. I would say if you really think you're interested and want to come on into the program and have questions, I'm going to give you this link once again to schedule a discovery session. And that way we can get really aligned to see is this your program? Is this for you? Any other questions? You're welcome, Anne. Welcome, you're welcome. And then also I do something called story priestessing. So if people want one-on-one sessions, I'm about to open up a couple sessions for the new year, and that will be there. All right, I invite you to take yourselves off mute, to say farewell, have a good day. I'll stay on and answer your question, Karen. And adieu. Karen, what was your question?
Oh, How often do you do some of the programs again, like the wisdom one I was interested in, but you know, the timing isn't great, so I don't, does that come back around?
This is the last time that I'm going to be teaching these classes live. That there might be a time where you can watch like a recording in the future. Um, and there might be a time when other teachers facilitate these classes, but in terms of like me teaching these courses in this way, this is my last round of this particular program. So
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Okay, great, thank you.
Questions? Okay, great. Have a lovely day. Take good care.